So we're going to ask you to select a passage and maybe read to us.
It's a short passage, and it's sort of a light passage in some respects, but it has a mention of Bridget. This little scene takes place on the island. It begins with Maeve and her friend, who until now has been a rival in the local school, Helen, going out to the island to ostensibly cure Helen of her warts. And Helen has witnessed Maeve banish the rats from the coal shed of the local school, parish school, and she was fascinated by this. And Maeve managed to get rid of the rats. The vets couldn't do it. Nobody could do it. They put down cages and poisons. But Maeve did it by just walking in and talking to them in Irish. And just said, look, you've been here long enough now. You've had a good time, but you need to leave. And off they went. So Helen witnesses this, and she's kind of fascinated. And then Maeve says, look, it's not just hocus pocus. I can actually help you. So this is it. When Helen arrived at Squints the next day, Maeve was waiting by Dan Daly's yawl. For Biddy's Island, are you? Dan lifted a curious eye. He shook Helen's hand and laughed, pulling his head back like a spirited horse. Maeve watched as Dan hoisted Helen's slim frame into the boat, his sinewy neck going taut as he lowered her carefully into the stern, making sure her pleated skirt didn't touch the dirty fishing net. Watch them close now. As Dan rowed out, Maeve sensed Helen's skittishness. They still hardly knew each other, and this was, Helen admitted, her first time in a boat. In her 15 years, she'd never been to sea. Her lemony smell was sharper than usual, and when her hands began to shake, Maeve reached over and touched them, letting her know they didn't have far to go. A column of cormorants looked on from the mussel-clad rocks, like Gardaí Síochána watching them pass. Whiffs of slurry blew in from Myra's headland, mixing with odours of tar and stale shellfish, seeping up from the bilges. Helen was white. Halfway to the island, Maeve sighted a swarm of jellyfish and, leaning over the side, peered down at the pale, pulsing discs, their organs trailing lilac strings. Helen did likewise, letting her hand drift in the wake. Don't touch them, Maeve warned. They sting. Helen pulled her fingers from the water, nesting them under her armpit. Nearing the island, a westerly breeze whiplashed the waves, making the fuchsia dance about the houses. Once ashore, Maeve thanked Dan and led Helen straight to the brew. When they opened the door, a dark shadow shaved their heads. Helen ducked, covering her hair. What's that? Scián Lathair. Bats, explained Maeve, patting Helen's head. They're friends. Like your rats? Yes, but with wings on. It was dark in the hut, with only one small window looking out on the Sound. A single shaft of sunlight fell across the earthen floor. There was a tart smell of sea-wrack hanging on strings from the rafters. Maeve wiped the stool with her sleeve and passed it over to Helen, her first patient from the mainland. Helen rubbed her hands tightly. She gave a nervous moan before sitting down. Shush now, said Maeve, placing a palm on Helen's shoulder as she set to work. She uncluttered the worktop, removing coils of hemp, a rusty iron clamp, and some odd brass fittings, placing them onto an upper shelf. Once she'd cleared the space, she took her father's filleting knife and sliced a blade of dillishk, placing the purple leathery strips beside a bunch of dandelions, which she crushed until a pale milk oozed from the stems. She then opened the tobacco tin and brushed the ingredients inside. What? Helen pinched her nose, gawking at the mush in the tin. I have to swallow that? Maeve smiled, coaxing Helen back to the stool. Watch, she said, parting Helen's fingers until the warts were fully exposed. Then, dipping her thumb in the paste, she rubbed it onto the fleshy lumps. She spent a few minutes on each, whispering gently in Irish, Emigi live, Emigi live, Emigi live, as if she was talking to living creatures. And when she'd finished, she bent down and kissed them. Don't, cried Helen, pulling away. They're ugly. No, they're not, Maeve replied. They're part of us. Hurt bits that heal if you bless them. How do you know? Because my father told me. How did he know? Because he learnt it from Bridget. Saint Bridget? Yes. But she died, protested Helen, hundreds of years ago. Miss Collins told us. A bit of her died, but a bit still lives. She comes back whenever someone heals. Like now? Yes, like now. And how can you tell? Because my feet go hot and I hear special sounds. What sounds? Irish sounds, island sounds, like bees buzzing or flames licking, shells cracking or waves falling. Special sounds. Maeve's eyes shone. You think I'm off with the fairies, don't you? Helen lowered her gaze and didn't answer. Maeve raised a finger and closed Helen's eyes. Don't look now, just listen. Eirskir, Lias, Mahim, Knossu. Maeve spoke the words slowly before going silent. Helen waited. Do you hear something? Asked Maeve after a bit. No. Waves? No. Bees? Helen shook her head. Nothing. Well, can you feel something? Like what? Like fire in your hands? Helen shrugged. No. You have to try, Helen. It won't work if you don't have faith. Maeve reached for the Bridget brat hanging by the font and dipping the wool in the water brushed Helen's warts. Helen opened her eyes. You're like Father Keogh cleaning his chalice. She cocked her head, beginning to relax. Maybe, Maeve shrugged, but I don't talk Latin. You talk Irish. I do. Why? Because it works. Helen rolled up the cloth and replaced it on the hook. Irish words heal if you use them right. It's the sounds that matter. She repeated the cure slowly. Eirskir, Lias, Mahim, Knossu. You believe that? I do. And at that moment, Maeve did believe. She believed everything she was saying, everything she was doing, all doubts dissolving like foam on a wave. And if you believe too, Helen Flynn, your words will be gone when you wake in the morning.
Thank you. We're able to visualize what you describe, and I think the area that I haven't asked you about is how you write and how you research. And did you visit these places and then try and capture them, or do you just follow the flow of the idea and the words come to life like the ones you just read?
Well, you know, a lot of that was just eavesdropping. Overhearing people speak, learning their stories, particularly a lot of the older people who were disappearing from this world and maybe are coming back, like revenants on the eve of Halloween, through fiction. And overhearing young people. Maeve is young, Helen are young. And as for doing research, it wasn't difficult because the island is right opposite where we live in West Cork in Ireland. So every morning when I wake, I'm looking at Bridget's Island. And I spend a lot of time fishing there, crab and lobster pots, and I visit it often. And the well, it's uninhabited now, but it's a very inspirational place. And the well was lost for 100 years. Nobody, well, not 70 years. Nobody knew exactly where it was after the locals abandoned the island. And eventually, through some talk with locals who used to talk about putting lobster pots down off Biddy's well. And I asked them, where's Biddy's well? And they said, it's under that collapsed cave. And I went there with some other locals and we found the dripping well. So it's still there. But that was salvage too in a way. Right. That was salvage too in a way.